Hey guys, tonight we slip through a creaking tavern door in some half-forgotten medieval town. The hinges groan, the oak sways, and a burst of warmth hits you right in the face. Stale ale, sweat, and roasted meat all tangled together like a strange perfume that no one in this century would bottle. Candles flicker against the soot-blackened rafters, and you're immediately swallowed by the noisy hum of voices, the scrape of chairs on planks, and the clunk of mugs hitting the table. It's not a royal hall, not a grand castle, just a plain tavern, but to you, it feels like stepping into another planet. And the first thing you think, well, you probably won't survive this night sober. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time down below. I love seeing who's drifting off with me across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wooden beams overhead creak as if they're laughing too, and you trudge further inside, nudged by shoulders and cloaks brushing past. Someone spills a drink near your boots, warm ale trickling down into the cracks of the floor, but no one apologizes. Here, spilling is practically a tradition. Your eyes catch on the long tables stretching like rivers of chaos, strangers packed tight, elbows jabbing, mugs raising. A man near you is already red-cheeked, belting a song out of tune, and the crowd around him cheers as if he's the king of music. The reality? He's probably the village blacksmith who hasn't sung since last year's harvest, but in this room, hierarchy blurs. You slide into a bench and the wood groans as though it too has endured countless bottoms over centuries. A serving girl slaps down a tankard of ale in front of you without... Here's your first mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, taverns weren't just about drinking. They were hubs of gossip, business, and even law. Deals were struck in the din, marriages arranged over mugs, and sometimes even justice debated between swallows. And then a quirky tidbit you probably didn't see coming. Many taverns had what were called tippling benches that tilted forward ever so slightly. Why? To stop drunks from passing out comfortably against the wall. If you nodded off, gravity shoved you awake or dumped you right into the floor. Consider it medieval quality control. At the head of the room, a lute player strums furiously, trying to be heard over laughter. You watch as a group of farmers claps along, completely out of rhythm, but joyous anyway. A man at your table leans over, teeth missing, breath like onions and hops. He insists on teaching you a drinking rhyme, slapping your back every third word. You nod, smile politely, and try not to choke on the froth as you gulp. The room is rowdy but not violent, at least not yet. Every tavern had its own rhythm, a strange dance between mirth and menace. A joke could turn into a brawl, or a brawl into a joke with no warning. Historians still argue whether taverns were genuinely inclusive spaces where classes mixed freely, or whether those glimpses of nobles beside peasants were just rare exceptions. Tonight, though, it feels like everyone's on equal footing. Boots muddy, mugs equally dented, voices equally hoarse. Your ears catch the sound of dice rolling across a nearby table, the sharp clatter against wood. A man yells in triumph while another slams his fist, swearing his luck is cursed. The serving girl just smirks. She's seen this ritual 1,000 times, men blaming luck, never their own greed. And you, well, you sink deeper into the scene. The candles blur, the smoke from the hearth curls lazily upward, and the air itself seems to thrum with that mix of desperation and joy. You take another sip, surprised at how quickly it warms your chest. Not delicious, not crisp like modern beer, but it feels alive, as though someone bottled the very soil. Across the room, a dog sprawls under a table, content as scraps rain down near its paws. A child, yes, a child, is sipping from a smaller mug, face scrunching at the bitterness. Nobody blinks. To them, this is life, normal and everyday. For you, it's surreal, like watching a world where childhood ends before it ever begins. And then, from the corner, You hear an older man croak a story, something about a barmaid who once outdrank 10 sailors and walked home straighter than a priest. The room bursts into laughter, mugs slam down in approval, and the tale grows taller with every retelling. Maybe it's true, maybe it's pure tavern legend, but no one cares. The night isn't about truth, it's about rhythm, about flow, about being swept along in the river of noise. A sneeze echoes near the door, sharp and wet, and someone mutters about bad humours in the air. You suddenly remember, no one here knows about germs. The same mugs pass from hand to hand. The same sleeves wipe noses and then grab loaves of bread. Yet somehow people endure, laughing their way through centuries without hand sanitizer. And in that moment you feel it. The tavern isn't just a place, it's a cocoon. Step inside and you're wrapped in warmth, chaos, and ale-stained camaraderie. Outside, the cold cobblestones wait, the damp streets curl with mist, but inside, laughter is louder than hunger, and fire is brighter than fear. You tilt your head back, the ceiling beams looming like dark ribs of a beast, and let yourself drift further into the din. The night is young, the ale is endless, and you are, for now, exactly where you need to be. The honey-sweet haze of mead lingers in your senses when a sharper aroma cuts through, a dry, fruity tang that doesn't belong to barley or honey. You turn your head and spot a nobleman swirling a goblet, the deep red liquid catching the light like stained glass. Wine. Not the rough homebrew of peasants, but imported treasure from the vineyards of France or Italy, hauled north over miles of mud roads and dangerous seas. The nobles at their table boast loudly, holding their goblets higher than necessary, each sip meant not only to quench but to show off. They speak of vineyards as if they own the vines themselves, reciting names of regions you can barely pronounce. For them, this isn't just drink, it's a statement. We can afford to bring the sun of the south into our grey, damp north. Here's your mainstream fact. Wine was a marker of class in much of medieval northern Europe. While southern regions drank it daily, northern peasants rarely touched the stuff. Transport was expensive, spoilage common, and the cost put it far beyond ordinary households. Beer was for everyone, wine was for the few. Now for the quirky tidbit, sometimes spoiled or sour wine was sold to peasants at a discount. To make it drinkable, they mixed it with spices, honey, or even chalk. Yes, chalk. Imagine sipping your fine vintage and crunching grit between your teeth. Not exactly the romantic vineyard experience. The peasants around you don't bother glancing toward the goblets. Their mugs of ale are enough, their jokes louder, their laughter freer. But you can't help noticing the glimmer of envy in a few eyes when the nobles clink glass instead of wood or pewter. It's not just the taste, it's the symbolism. Wine means status, power, access, a liquid throne in every cup. Historians still argue whether imported wine truly shifted northern drinking culture or remained a passing indulgence for the upper crust. Did it trickle down eventually, or stay fenced within the castle walls? Watching tonight's nobles, you'd guess the latter. They guard their goblets as fiercely as their titles. You swirl your own ale and smirk. Imagine a modern sommelier waltzing into this tavern, sniffing a goblet, then declaring, "Hints of blackberry and leather." The crowd would throw bread crusts at him before finishing their songs. Here, drink is judged by how fast it warms your belly, not how eloquently you describe its bouquet. A noble leans too far back, spilling half his goblet across the table. His companions laugh, but you can see the flash of irritation. Wasting wine is wasting gold. A peasant nearby sees the splash and instinctively licks his lips as if the chance to taste it, even from the floor, would be worth the humiliation. He doesn't dare move, though. Some lines aren't crossed. The tavern dog, braver than men, slurps at the puddle before being kicked away by a servant. For one brief moment, even the mutt tastes luxury. Your joke of the night. You picture offering the nobleman a box of modern bargain wine and telling him it's finely aged in cardboard. He'd probably faint before realizing it's actually pretty decent. The room shifts again. The nobles toasting with their ruby-coloured pride, the peasants roaring louder with their cloudy ale, and you caught between them. You realize that drinks don't just quench thirst, they divide worlds. What you hold in your cup can announce whether you're struggling in the mud or basking in imported sunlight. You take another sip of your humble brew, feeling the barley earthiness coat your tongue. The nobles may drink their vineyards, but your drink is local, alive, and shared without ceremony. Both cups warm the body, but only one feels like it belongs to everyone. The nobles sip their wine with slow dignity, but back at your end of the tavern, things are getting competitive. A group of farmers slams dice onto the table, mugs spilling over as laughter and jeers erupt. You lean closer, realizing this isn't just gambling for coins, it's a drinking game. And in this room, that means danger and delight in equal measure. One man shouts the rules, or maybe he's just making them up on the spot. Roll a 6, pass the cup left. Roll snake eyes, drain it yourself. Roll anything else, and the group invents a new penalty while everyone howls. No parchment records these rules, no book keeps them straight. It's chaos, reshaped with every round. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval drinking games weren't rare. From dice contests to who can drain the horn fastest, these pastimes blurred gambling and drinking, often pushing men past their limits. Some towns even tried to ban them, fearing they caused too many fights and wasted too much grain. Now the quirky tidbit. In some regions, one game involved dunking apples in ale, then trying to bite them while drunk. Imagine soggy bobbing for apples, only with sticky beer soaking your tunic and foam up your nose. Medieval fun at its finest. The man to your left rolls poorly, and the crowd screams for him to chug. He grips the mug, tips it back, and nearly topples off the bench. The table slaps in unison, egging him on, while someone behind you starts a chant that grows louder until the whole corner is shaking with rhythm. Historians still argue whether such drinking contests were harmless bonding rituals or genuinely destructive habits that drained communities of grain and coin. Watching tonight's group, you can see both possibilities. Joy glows on their flushed faces, but so does recklessness. One more roll, one more gulp, one more stumble toward disaster. The serving girl rolls her eyes, but even she can't resist laughing as a man hiccups mid-chug, spraying froth across the table. He wipes his beard proudly, claiming victory as though he's conquered a kingdom. Another immediately challenges him, pounding his chest and demanding a rematch. You grin, because this is the raw energy of tavern life. Ale isn't just swallowed, it's weaponized, turned into sport, spectacle, and sometimes punishment. Your joke for the night? You picture a medieval Olympics. Events include fastest horn drain, longest coherent song while tipsy, and sprinting to the privy without spilling. Honestly, it would have pulled a crowd. The dice roll again, louder, faster. The chants rise, the mugs crash down, and you can feel the bench beneath you shaking with excitement. You take a cautious sip, silently thankful no one has dragged you into the competition yet. Because in this corner of the tavern, one bad roll means one long, messy night. The dice clatter fades behind you as the tavern door bursts open again, letting in a gust of cold night air, and with it the thump of drums. You glance outside, blinking against torchlight and laughter, and realize the real chaos isn't confined to the smoky room. The festival is spilling across the cobbled streets, and the tavern is only one piece of it. You step out, mug in hand, and the scene engulfs you. Bonfires blaze in the square, sparks racing up into the black sky. People whirl in masks, grotesque faces carved from leather, painted in wild colours, horns sprouting where no horns should be. Some masks grin with too many teeth, others leer with hollow eyes, and you suddenly wonder how anyone can tell who's who. But maybe that's the point. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval festivals often blurred the sacred and the profane. Carnivals before Lent, harvest feasts and midsummer fires all gave people license to invert order. Peasants dressed as kings, priests mocked in jest, and rules tossed aside under the cloak of celebration. Now the quirky tidbit. During certain festivals, men dressed as animals, bears, goats, even donkeys, then chased villagers through the streets, all while drunk. Imagine trying to explain to your neighbor why you woke up bruised because a man in a goat mask tackled me into a haystack. You sway with the crowd as music surges, bagpipes wheezing, fiddles screeching, drums pounding hard enough to shake your ribs. People dance in circles, stumbling more than stepping. Tankards raised high, mead drips down chins, ale soaks sleeves, and somewhere a noble's goblet has found its way into a peasant's hand. Out here, titles vanish. Everyone is masked, everyone is muddied, and everyone is gloriously drunk. Historians still argue whether these carnivals acted as harmless safety valves for social tension or as dangerous explosions that could spiral to riots. Watching a man in a fox mask climb onto a cart and lead a chorus of nonsense, you'd believe both. The joy feels wild, but so does the edge of violence simmering beneath. A young woman grabs your arm, laughing, spinning you into the circle. You stumble, almost trip, but the crowd catches you, shoving you along. You whirl faster, faster, the fire blurring, the faces indistinguishable behind painted wood and ale-soaked smiles. For a moment, you're not you. You're just another mask in the frenzy. And here's your joke of the night. You imagine medieval party planners offering packages. Bronze tier, 1 goat mask and half a jug of ale. Gold tier, guaranteed bonfire seat and priority spot in the donkey chase. You catch your breath against a wall, mug still miraculously half full. A man in a stag mask bows to you before collapsing into laughter, spilling his drink into the gutter. The smell of honey, smoke, sweat, and roasted meat swirls together, overwhelming but intoxicating. Behind you, the tavern glows, but out here, the whole town has become a tavern without walls. Fire dances in the sky, voices roar into the night, and you realize these festivals weren't escapes from reality. They were reality, loud, messy, fleeting bursts of joy in lives too often weighed down by toil and hunger. You sip, the ale warm now, and let the music drag you back into the firelight. Tonight, rules don't matter, masks don't matter. All that matters is how long you can keep dancing before you fall. By the time the fires outside die down and the masks scatter back into shadows, you're wobbling your way into the tavern again, stomach heavy with ale, mead, and a little too much roasted meat. The songs have faded to murmurs, men slumped on benches, women collecting empty jugs, and then you hear it, groans. Not of joy this time, but of suffering. The dreaded medieval hangover has arrived. A man at the next table clutches his head like it's about to split open, eyes red as embers. Another leans against the wall, muttering a prayer, while a third insists he's found the cure. A raw egg, swallowed whole, still warm from the chicken. He demonstrates proudly, yolk dribbling down his beard, while the rest of the table cheers and gags in equal measure. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval people did have hangover remedies, many of which show up in medical texts of the time. Common cures included raw eggs, cabbage juice, or broth to balance the humours. The logic wasn't modern medicine, it was humoral theory, the idea that bodily fluids had to be kept in harmony. Now the quirky tidbit. One English remedy advised grinding rabbit droppings into powder, mixing it with wine and drinking it straight. Imagine your friend leaning across the table, sliding you a goblet and saying, "Trust me, it works." You'd almost rather keep the headache. The tavern fills with the stench of sour breath, spilled ale and regret. A serving girl shakes her head, muttering that she's seen worse. She slams down a tray of bread soaked in vinegar, claiming it washes the humours clean. You watch as desperate men gnaw it like starving wolves. Some grimace, others nod as though convinced their headaches already lifting. Placebo medieval edition. Historians still argue whether any of these remedies actually worked or whether they were just rituals to soothe the mind while the body suffered. Looking around at the groaning figures, you'd wager the latter. Nothing's curing this except time and maybe a dark room. One man swears by sweat, stumbling outside to run laps around the square. Moments later, he vomits spectacularly into the mud, to the roaring laughter of the crowd. Another insists that more ale is the answer. The dog that bit you, as they say. He downs half a mug and promptly passes out face first into the table, snoring like a war drum. You raise your own mug cautiously, your head buzzing but not collapsing. Yet. Maybe you've paced yourself better, or maybe luck's on your side. Either way, you're grateful no one's shoving rabbit powder into your drink. Your joke for the night? You imagine a medieval pharmacy with aisles labelled hangover cures, raw eggs, advanced remedies, goat's blood, and premium option. Just accept your life choices. The tavern dog yawns, licking crumbs from the floor, probably immune to all this nonsense. You envy him for a moment, his life blissfully free of headaches or humoral imbalances. And as you sip slowly, you realize that hangovers, like taverns and festivals, connect centuries. The misery you see around you, the pounding heads, the sour stomachs, the desperate cures, it's timeless. The medieval world may be gone, but the morning after regret, that's eternal. The groans of hungover men still echo when the tavern door creaks again, but this time it isn't a traveller or a farmer stepping through. It's two men in rough wool tunics, dragging a stumbling figure between them. His shirt is torn, his hair matted with sweat, and his eyes are glazed in the unmistakable way of someone who has lost not only the night but also his dignity. The crowd hushes, not out of pity, but out of anticipation. You're about to witness public punishment. They shove him into the square outside, and a small crowd gathers as word spreads faster than spilled ale. Stocks stand waiting, those heavy wooden boards with holes for the head and hands. The drunk is shoved forward, his arms jammed in place, his face pushed through the opening. The boards slam shut with a thud that rings louder than the jeers. Now he's stuck, helpless, wobbling like a puppet whose strings were cut. Here's your mainstream fact. Public punishments for drunkenness were common in medieval Europe. Stocks, pillories, or drunkards' cloaks, barrels worn like humiliating costumes, were used to shame offenders, not only for being drunk, but for disturbing the peace while in that state. And the quirky tidbit. In some towns, drunks were strapped backward onto donkeys and paraded through the streets, their humiliation magnified by the beast's slow, stubborn pace. Imagine the donkey stopping mid-route to eat weeds while the crowd jeered and threw cabbage leaves. A nightmare Uber ride. The man in the stocks groans, trying to lift his head, but children are already darting forward with handfuls of rotten vegetables. A cabbage hits his cheek with a wet smack, followed by an apple so soft it bursts across his chin. The crowd howls with laughter, even those still reeling from their own hangovers. Better him than them, you sense. Historians still argue whether these punishments truly curbed public drunkenness or simply entertained the sober, or at least the slightly less drunk. Watching the crowd tonight, it feels more like theatre than justice, a performance staged for laughter rather than reform. One apprentice from the guild stands unimpressed and mocks the students' Latin. The students shout back, hurling insults, and suddenly the tavern teeters on the edge of chaos again. Tankards slam, voices rise, fists twitch at sides. Will it be a fight tonight, or just another round of posturing? You sip your ale, smirking. Your joke for the night? Imagine a medieval report card. Excels in rhetoric, fails in sobriety. Recommended course, less wine, more water. The tavern keeper, seeing the storm brewing, bellows for calm. The students laugh, toss him a coin far larger than the price of their drinks, and stumble toward another table, already plotting some prank on the way back to their dorms. For now, disaster is postponed, though you sense it could flare again before dawn. Students and townsfolk have danced this dangerous waltz for centuries. Half rivalry, half outright war, with ale always at the center. And as you drain the last of your mug, you can't help but think some things about youth, rebellion, and drink never change. The students' rowdiness lingers in the air, but your thoughts drift toward a different kind of chaos, the kind that rolls on waves. A man at the far table, his face leathered by salt and sun, raises his mug and begins a tale. His voice carries like a gull's cry, sharp and cutting through the tavern chatter, sailors' stories. You lean in, and suddenly the sea is inside the tavern with you. He speaks of endless barrels rolling below deck, each one brimming with ale. Not luxury wine, not golden mead, just steady, frothy beer, rationed daily to every sailor. It wasn't indulgence, it was necessity. Clean water spoiled quickly on ships, but ale stayed safe, its mild alcohol keeping sickness at bay. To deny it was to invite mutiny. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval sailors were often issued daily rations of beer or ale, sometimes a gallon per man. On longer voyages, when supplies dwindled, morale sank fast. Beer was as essential to survival as sails or rigging. Now the quirky tidbit. Some ships carried beer tasters, sailors whose actual job was to sample from each barrel to make sure it hadn't soured. Imagine being paid to sip your way across the sea while everyone else scrubbed decks. The dream job, unless you discovered the bad one. The old sailor mimes the rocking of a ship, sloshing ale across the table as if it were seawater. The crowd laughs, but his eyes are far away, seeing not the smoky tavern, but endless grey horizons. He tells of storms where barrels smashed loose, beer spilling into the bilge as men wept louder than the rain. He tells of nights when the only comfort was a mug passed hand to hand, men singing over the crash of waves to forget how small they were beneath the sky. Historians still argue whether alcohol kept sailors disciplined or made voyages even more dangerous. Was beer a stabilizer, or just another risk sloshing in their bellies? The truth, as always, probably depends on the night and the storm. The tavern dog perks up as the sailor drops a crust into his mug by accident. He fishes it out, shrugs, and eats it anyway. A man beside you mutters that on some voyages, sailors ate biscuits so hard with weevils you needed ale just to wash it down. You grimace, suddenly grateful your bread is merely stale, not alive. Your joke for the night? You imagine applying for a sailor's post. Skills: knot tying, climbing, rigging, drinking a gallon of ale without falling overboard. Honestly, it would probably get you hired. The sailor raises his mug again, toasting no one in particular, maybe the sea itself. The room joins him, shouting cheerfully, though most have never set foot on a deck. It doesn't matter. Tonight, in the glow of the fire, they all sail with him, riding waves of ale instead of salt water. You sip slowly, imagining the creak of masts, the slap of ropes, the endless, bitter taste of beer that wasn't just drink but life itself. In this moment, the tavern feels like a ship, the rafters like rigging, the crowd like a crew, drunk, loud, and clinging together against the storms of the world. The sailor's voice fades into the hum of the tavern, but another figure rises, a man in a long robe, his belt heavy with pouches of herbs and vials, a physician, or at least someone calling himself one. His eyes are sharp despite the drink, and when he sets his cup down, you notice the liquid inside isn't plain ale or wine. It's darker, spiced, with steam curling faintly from the rim. The tavern quiets as he explains. Medicine in a cup. He stirs it slowly, the aroma wafting toward you. Cinnamon, clove, maybe ginger. Exotic scents that don't belong in this smoky wooden hall. Someone mutters about apothecaries and markets, but the physician clears his throat, launching into a sermon about how this spiced wine balances the humours, strengthens the stomach, and wards off melancholy. His audience nods, half believing, half dreaming of far-off lands where such spices grow. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval medicine often prescribed wine and spiced beverages as remedies. Wine mixed with herbs was believed to aid digestion, ease fevers, and even treat plague. The alcohol preserved the mixtures and carried the virtues of the ingredients through the body. Now the quirky tidbit. One recipe recommended warming wine with ground pearls to strengthen the heart. Pearls. Imagine grinding your jewelry into dust just to sprinkle it in your drink. Expensive heartbreak if it doesn't work. The physician sips theatrically, smacking his lips, while a farmer beside him swigs straight ale and shrugs. The contrast is comical. One man performing alchemy with spices, the other just chasing thirst. Yet both believe they're healing themselves in their own way. Historians still argue whether these medical brews were genuine cures or elaborate placebo cocktails. Did the cloves soothe, or was it simply the warmth of alcohol convincing people they felt better? Watching the physician beam proudly, you suspect a bit of both. A peasant coughs violently nearby, and the physician eagerly offers him a sip of the potion. The man drinks, grimaces at the spice, then nods as if cured. "Better already," he croaks, though the look on his face suggests otherwise. The physician beams, declaring victory, while the crowd applauds half-heartedly. You imagine modern medicine shelves in a medieval tavern. For headaches, cinnamon wine. For fevers, garlic ale. For heartbreak, just drink more mead. Honestly, the logic tracks. Your joke of the night? You picture this physician on a cooking show. Today we're curing plague with a pinch of saffron and a splash of Bordeaux. Bon appetit. The dog sniffs at the spiced mug, sneezes and trots away. Even it knows some remedies aren't worth the trouble. Meanwhile, the physician raises his cup again, promising his brew can outlast winter itself. The crowd laughs, refills their mugs, and you take another sip of your plain ale, deciding maybe ignorance is healthier after all. Still, you can't deny the allure of that spiced steam curling like incense above the cup. For a moment, the tavern feels less like a rowdy hall and more like a laboratory of survival, where every swallow is both pleasure and prescription. The physician's spiced brew still lingers in the air when the tavern door creaks again. This time, instead of laughter or music following the newcomer, it's silence. A man in plain, dark clothes steps in, his face solemn, his voice already raised, not in song but in rebuke. You recognize the type instantly, a reformer. He doesn't sit, doesn't smile, doesn't even glance at the mugs. He climbs onto a bench and begins to preach. His words slice through the haze like a blade. Ale, he declares, is the devil's trick. Wine is vanity. Mead is lust in liquid form. Every mug raised is a step closer to hellfire. Every drunken laugh an echo of sin. The room groans, but people listen anyway. They've heard men like this before, but his voice carries a strange authority. Here's your mainstream fact. By the late medieval period, reformist voices, religious and civic alike, began calling for temperance, urging people to curb drinking habits that drained money and fueled disorder. Sermons against drunkenness were common, some even demanding taverns be closed altogether. Now the quirky tidbit. In some towns, reformers staged sobriety parades, where children marched carrying water jugs to shame adults for their ale mugs. Imagine being taunted by a 5-year-old holding a clay jug while you're trying to nurse your hangover. Brutal. The reformer pounds his fist on the bench, quoting scripture, warning of eternal damnation. Some men lower their mugs sheepishly, others laugh and drink louder, defiantly toasting his words. The alewife leans against the wall, unimpressed. She's heard this lecture too many times, and her broom sign above the door isn't coming down for one angry sermon. Historians still argue whether these temperance efforts actually shifted drinking culture or simply became background noise. Watching the tavern tonight, you can see both sides. A few men mutter that maybe they should go easy, while others double their pace, declaring they'd rather die drunk than live dry. A young boy tugs at the reformer's sleeve, asking if water is truly safe to drink. The man nods solemnly, but the crowd bursts out laughing. Everyone here knows what happens when you trust the well too much. One farmer shouts, "You first, preacher!" The reformer ignores him, but the tension cracks into giggles anyway. Your joke for the night? You imagine the reformer trying to run a modern pub. Welcome, friends. Today's special is lukewarm water with a slice of humility. Enjoy responsibly. The Yelp reviews would not be kind. Still, his words hang in the smoky air. Sin, excess, ruin. The rhythm of his warning threads itself through the laughter, a quiet undertone beneath the noise. Even as mugs rise and songs swell again, you sense the echo of reformers to come, their voices trying, however hopelessly, to sober up a world drunk on survival. You sip your ale, knowing full well he'd scowl at you, but tonight you don't care. One man's sermon is another man's lullaby. The reformer's voice fades into the smoky rafters, swallowed by laughter and clinking mugs. The night presses on, slower now, heavier. The tavern is dimmer, the fire burned low, the air thick with the scent of sweat, hops and ash. Around you, bodies slump across benches, snores rumbling like distant thunder. A candle gutters in the corner, its wax spilling silently, the last drops of light trembling against the wood. You sit still, hands loose around your mug, and realize the frenzy has ebbed. No more songs shaking the beams, no dice rattling across tables, no guilds pounding their mugs for votes. Just a low murmur, fading laughter, and the occasional hiccup as the tavern drifts towards silence. Someone coughs near the door. A bench creaks. The tavern dog shifts, curling into itself, nose tucked beneath its tail. The world feels slower, as if time itself has grown drowsy, exhaling one last breath before slipping into dreams. Here's your mainstream fact. Taverns often closed when candles burned out or ale ran dry, not by the clock. Time was measured in shadows and silence, the night ending when the room simply surrendered to sleep. And the quirky tidbit, some towns had ale conners, officials who tested beer by literally sitting in a puddle of it on a wooden bench. If their leather breeches stuck, the ale was strong enough. If not, fines followed. Imagine dozing off here only to wake with an official perched beside you, judging the stickiness of your drink. Historians still argue whether taverns were truly the heart of medieval social life or just one piece of a much larger web of gatherings, markets, fairs, guild halls, churches. But sitting here now, with the fire's last glow kissing the mugs, it's hard to imagine a world without them. The last candle sputters, its flame shrinking to a trembling ember. Darkness thickens, swallowing the rafters, the beams, the fire, aces of strangers who've now become companions in this long, loud night. You close your eyes, letting the warmth of ale hum in your chest. The echoes of laughter fade in your ears. The tavern breathes one last sigh, and so do you, slipping into stillness, into softness, into the sleep that has waited patiently behind every sip. And now, as the final echoes of song dissolve into silence, the night slows to a whisper. The tavern, once wild with voices and flames, drifts into the kind of quiet that feels almost sacred. The air is softer now, the smoke thinner, the floorboards no longer trembling beneath the stomp of boots. Everything has settled, as though the very building exhales, relieved to rest after such a long and raucous evening. You imagine yourself still seated there, shoulders loose, head heavy, watching the embers glow faintly in the hearth. The warmth is gentle now, not fierce, wrapping you like a blanket rather than a blaze. Shadows stretch lazily across the beams, and every sound, the dog shifting in its sleep, a soft snore from the corner, the faint crackle of cooling wood, feels distant, hushed, like the world is tucking itself in. Your eyes wander toward the dark window panes, where the night outside hangs still and patient. No revelers remain, no masks or music. Just the slow turning of time, steady and calm. The mug in your hand is empty, but you don't mind. You've had enough. Enough taste, enough laughter, enough story to carry you into dreams. Let your breathing match the rhythm of the room, slow, even, unhurried. Each inhale a sip of warmth, each exhale a release of weight. The tavern fades further, the rafters dissolving, the embers softening into nothing but glow. You are safe here, cradled in the quiet that follows joy, the peace that follows noise, and as you drift deeper, the last candle gutters out completely. Darkness surrounds you, not heavy, but comforting, like a cloak drawn snug around your shoulders. The night holds you gently, and with it, sleep finally arrives. The mug in your hand feels heavier with each sip, and you realize you're not just drinking, you're surviving. In this world, ale isn't a treat or a guilty pleasure, it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You glance around the tavern and notice that no one reaches for a cup of plain water. Why would they? The streams outside are murky, crawling with invisible killers, and the wells are often contaminated by the very animals drinking beside them. To gulp raw water is to roll dice with dysentery, and honestly, you don't feel like gambling with your guts tonight. Instead, you're handed what's called small beer. Don't let the name fool you. This isn't a craft IPA flight, it's basically low-alcohol barley tea. Weak enough to drink all day without toppling over, but strong enough to kill off whatever nastiness lurks in the liquid. Even kids slurp this stuff, their mugs clunking beside their parents, and no one bats an eye. Imagine preschoolers today swapping juice boxes for tiny tankards. Yeah, not happening. Here's your mainstream fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially northern regions, ale was literally the daily staple. For peasants, it wasn't just refreshment, it was hydration, nutrition, and sometimes wages. Farmhands could be partly paid in beer, a perk that sounds like a modern corporate joke, but was dead serious back then. Now for the quirky tidbit. In some towns, bakers' apprentices were given a beer allowance, yes, an actual bread and beer package. Imagine interning today and, instead of free coffee, your boss hands you 2 mugs of ale before noon. Productivity might dip, but morale would soar. You notice a boy near the hearth carrying a tray of these small beers, his arms wobbling like reeds. Each mug looks bigger than his head, but he delivers them carefully, his little face solemn with purpose. He's not playing waiter for fun. This is survival. This is culture. This is life. The hum in the tavern deepens as you sip your own weak brew. It tastes grainy, faintly sour, like liquid bread left out in the rain. Not glamorous, not intoxicating, but strangely comforting. And you realize that here your choice isn't coffee or tea, it's ale or illness. Somewhere at the edge of the room, an old man coughs violently, and you wonder if he skipped his beer ration today. People whisper that the humours are out of balance in him, too much black bile maybe. Nobody talks about bacteria or sanitation. Those words don't exist. Instead, they place their faith in fermented barley water, and in a way, they're not wrong. The serving girl passes by again, dropping a stronger brew onto the table across from you. This one foams high, a drink for the evening, not the morning. She winks at the man receiving it, and you realise there's an entire unspoken schedule of drinks here. Small beer for dawn, heavier ale for dusk, wine if you can afford it, and mead if you're lucky. Each hour has its liquid, each mood has its mug. The men at your table lean close, muttering about how much grain was harvested last week. The ale is thin this season, they say, because the fields gave little. You feel the weight of that truth. Every sip is tied to the soil, every gulp to the harvest. If crops fail, the tavern doesn't just quiet, it starves. You laugh quietly at the thought. In your world, people complain if the coffee machine at work is broken for a morning. Here, if the barley yield collapses, you're looking at months of misery and very thirsty children. Perspective is sobering, even when you're technically drinking. And here's the open debate that drifts into your ears like smoke. Historians still argue whether people were always mildly tipsy because of constant ale consumption, or whether small beer was weak enough that folks went about their day clear-headed. Did medieval carpenters build cathedrals while buzzing, or were they surprisingly sober despite chugging gallons? You'll never know for sure, but looking at the gleam in the eyes around you, you're guessing the truth lands somewhere in between. A man next to you suddenly burps so loudly the dog under the table startles. He pats his chest proudly as if he's just performed a minor miracle. Everyone laughs, mugs raise in salute, and for a moment you feel part of the rhythm. This is their morning coffee break, their office water cooler, their everything, and you're swept along in the current of it, one frothy sip at a time. The tavern noise rattles around your ears as you slide the empty mug forward. Before you can even blink, another is shoved into your hand. This one smells richer, earthier, and you notice the man who delivered it wears a robe that brushes the floor. His tonsured head gleams in the candlelight, and you realize he's not a waiter, he's a monk. Monks brewing quietly in their cloisters, perfecting recipes older than dynasties. That's the heartbeat you feel in this drink. You take a sip, and suddenly the weak barley water you just had feels like a child's toy. This brew is complex, dark, layered, as if the holy man poured scripture and patience into it. You picture him back at the abbey, stirring a huge copper vat, the sweet smell of malt mixing with incense drifting through the stone halls. Here's your mainstream fact. Monasteries were centers of brewing innovation throughout medieval Europe. Monks recorded recipes meticulously, refined fermentation methods, and produced some of the safest and tastiest drinks around. Their brewing wasn't just indulgence. It was survival for travelers, medicine for the sick, and let's be honest, a morale booster for their own cloistered lives. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some monasteries rationed beer by the gallon, literally. In the 14th century, certain German abbeys allotted each monk up to 5 litres a day. 5 litres. Imagine spending your holy hours chanting psalms with that much ale sloshing in your belly. If that doesn't put the spirit in spirituality, I don't know what does. You lift the mug again, and the warmth spreads, not just in your chest, but in your head. The monk nods as if to say, yes, this is the good stuff. He moves on, and you catch a glimpse of the leather flask at his side, engraved with a cross. Faith and fermentation, married in a single sip. At the far end of the tavern, a traveller boasts loudly that the monks of Belgium brew the strongest ale in Christendom. Another interrupts, swearing by the English monasteries, claiming their liquid bread could keep a man standing through plague and famine. Historians still argue whether monastic brewing began as a sincere spiritual act of charity or simply a practical way to keep monasteries funded and supplied. Tonight you don't care which theory is truer. You're just grateful the monks didn't spend all their time copying dusty manuscripts. The dog under the table licks at a puddle near your boots, tail wagging lazily. You wonder if even it prefers monk-brewed ale to water. A child nearby sneaks a sip from his father's cup, coughing at the strength, eyes wide in surprise. His father chuckles, ruffles his hair, and nudges the mug back toward him anyway. No one here coddles childhood. Life is short, and you drink when you can. You let the froth cling to your lip, the bitterness fade on your tongue, and you imagine the stone cloisters where this all began. Bells tolling softly in the distance, monks humming prayers as barrels age in the shadows. Brewing wasn't just a trade, it was devotion, ritual, a way to sanctify even something as earthy as beer. And here's your joke for the night. You picture a monk today leaning into a craft beer convention announcing, "Actually, we invented IPAs." Also, confessions in booth 7. The hipsters would faint. The lute strikes up another tune, the rhythm almost matching the steady thump of your own heartbeat. Around you, laughter swells, the tavern filling with voices as mugs keep arriving, and you realize you're not just a visitor now. You're part of the story, sitting shoulder to shoulder with centuries of drinkers, each sip blurring the line between sacred and simple, between survival and celebration. The air grows hotter as more bodies press into the tavern. You feel the walls almost swelling with noise, and suddenly the crowd parts for a group striding in as if the room belongs to them. Their cloaks are trimmed in fur, their boots polished, and their laughter is sharp and loud enough to cut through the din. Nobles, they don't sit where you sit. They command an entire long table at the far end, and servants scramble to load it with food that looks like it belongs in a painting rather than on a plate. You smell roasted venison, spiced sausages, and sweet pies dripping honey, each dish landing on oak planks with a thud that rattles the mugs nearby. The nobles wave their hands lazily, as if summoning mountains of meat is nothing more than a reflex. You watch greasy juices drip down platters, see fat candles spill wax over silver plates, and for a moment you're almost hypnotized. Here's your mainstream fact. Royal and aristocratic feasts in the Middle Ages were not just meals, but displays of power. The sheer abundance, whole roasted boars, swan pies, fountains of wine, was as much about reminding guests of status as it was about feeding them. Eating in excess was practically a political performance. Now for a quirky tidbit. At some of these feasts, cooks prepared illusion foods, dishes disguised as something else. A pie might release live birds when cut open, imagine the chaos at the table, or a roasted peacock might be redressed in its feathers for dramatic flair, a medieval ta-da, if you will. The nobles raise goblets of deep red wine, imported and costly, the kind peasants like you at this table would never dream of tasting. They toast to victories, to hunts, to marriages, to absolutely anything that comes to mind. One man slaps another on the back so hard that the wine sloshes over, staining the tablecloth. The servant bows, replaces the goblet, and the order roars even louder. Historians still argue whether these extravagant banquets were regular affairs or rare displays reserved for truly special occasions. Some argue peasants only ever saw them once in a lifetime, while others claim the nobility gorged themselves as routinely as you drink your morning coffee. Watching the nobles tonight, you'd swear feasting was their full-time profession. You take another gulp of your humbler ale, and the contrast almost stings. Around you, the peasants nibble on bread crusts and salted fish, their eyes occasionally darting to the feast at the far end, half envy, half resignation. Nobody dares complain aloud. It's just the way of the world. Nobles feast, peasants scrape, and everyone hopes for enough barley to brew through winter. Still, a hush falls briefly as a platter of roasted pheasants is carried past, the golden skins glistening in the firelight. For one heartbeat, even the roughest farmers at your table pause chewing, tracking the bird like hungry cats. Then the noise returns, mugs slam, and life goes on. You can't help but grin. Here's your joke for the night. Imagine walking into a medieval feast as a modern guest and asking, "Excuse me, is this gluten-free?" The silence would be deafening right before someone handed you a turkey leg the size of your arm. The nobles burst into a chorus of song, voices carrying high as if daring the peasants to try and match. But their melodies are smooth, rehearsed, practiced in echoing halls. You realize then that music too is divided by class. Out here, it's raw chants and bawdy lyrics. In there, it's refined ballads and lutes, strumming courtly airs. Two worlds in one room divided by a single long table. And yet, you notice a curious detail. A boy from your side sneaks near the noble's table, offering a jug of ale. The noble accepts, drinks, and then, with surprising grace, flicks the boy a coin. For a moment, worlds blur. Laughter doesn't care if you wear fur or rags. Drink, at least tonight, belongs to everyone. The fire crackles, shadows lick the beams above, and you sit there thinking, you've just witnessed a banquet and a survival meal under the same roof. A theatre of wealth, a murmur of hunger, and you, balanced between them with your humble mug. Your eyes wander away from the glittering noble table, back to the corner where the smoke gathers near the rafters. There, you catch a glimpse of something less polished, but far more familiar, peasant brewing. You picture the farmhouse just outside these tavern walls, where a crooked wooden shack doubles as brewery, kitchen, and storage shed. You imagine trudging across muddy fields, ducking under the low roof, and finding a woman hunched over a steaming pot, stirring with a spoon longer than your arm. She isn't chasing flavor profiles or prestige, she's chasing survival. Barley, oats, maybe rye if the harvest was kind. Whatever grew in the field went straight into the brew, and whatever came out was shared by the family, neighbors, and sometimes the village itself. Here's your mainstream fact. In medieval villages, ale-making was often a domestic chore handled primarily by women. Known as alewives, they brewed small batches in their homes, selling or trading the excess in the community. Beer wasn't commercial yet, it was household necessity, closer to baking bread than running a business. Now the quirky tidbit. Records mention that some batches were so weak or poorly strained that chunks of grain floated in the mug. Picture chewing your way through a drink and politely smiling about it. Medieval smoothies, anyone? You sip your current tavern ale and glance toward a peasant at your table. His mug is cloudier than yours, the liquid almost resembling porridge. He slurps happily, though, wiping his mouth on his sleeve and sighing like it's nectar of the gods. That's the thing. When choices are muddy ale or cholera, you'll choose muddy ale every time. A group of farmers nearby clink their mugs together, laughing about how strong last year's brew was. One swears he saw a donkey talk after 3 gulps. Another insists he could plough 2 fields in one afternoon at liquid courage. Historians still argue whether peasants exaggerated the strength of their homemade ale, or if occasional batches really did knock folks flat after a pint. Tonight, you're inclined to believe the donkey story, mostly because the teller delivers it with such sincerity. You lean back, let the din wash over you, and think about the rhythm of peasant brewing, the smoke of hearth fires stinging the eyes, the smell of damp barley hanging heavy, the children scooping foam from the pot just to taste what's coming. Brewing was never just about drinking, it was community, ritual, and maybe even magic. Some whispered charms into the wort, believing a bad word could sour the whole batch. Others hung herbs on the rafters, more superstition than science, but it gave comfort. The dog at your feet yawns, probably dreaming of bread crusts dunked in ale. And you? You picture walking into a modern grocery store with a peasant by your side, rows of bottled craft beer, colourful labels shouting hints of citrus or oak barrel aged. You can almost hear the peasant laughing. Hints of citrus? We had hints of swamp water. Your mug is half empty now, foam sliding down the sides. A farmer at the end of your table tips his own back, chugging noisily until not a drop remains. Then he slams it down and calls for another, boasting he could outdrink a night. The table erupts in cheers, and suddenly you're swept into their world, clapping along, smiling through the haze. This isn't luxury, not like the noble's endless platters, but it's honest. It's barley boiled with patience, oats simmered with hope, mugs passed around until everyone feels just a little warmer inside. And in that simplicity, you find yourself oddly content. The air inside the tavern shifts again, not from food or fire, but from sound. A rhythmic thump rises from a corner, boots stomping in time with hands slapping tabletops. Someone strums the lute harder, then another voice belts a line, and before you know it, the room erupts in drinking songs. You sway where you sit, your body almost dragged by the wave of voices. The melody isn't sweet, it's ragged, loud, and stubbornly off-key, but it doesn't matter. The song belongs to everyone, and every throat in the tavern joins in, whether croaking like a frog or bellowing like a bull. The lyrics are bawdy, full of jokes about alewives, clumsy knights, and maybe one or two farm animals in compromising situations. You laugh even when you don't fully understand the words. The tone alone carries the joke. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval taverns and festivals often featured communal songs, many of which became drinking anthems that survived for centuries. Singing wasn't just entertainment, it was memory. People who couldn't read still passed on culture through verse, rhythm, and rhyme. And now for the quirky tidbit. One recorded medieval song included instructions for when to burp during the chorus. Imagine a crowd of drunk villagers pausing mid-song, then belching in unison before roaring into the next verse. Who needs harmony when you've got that? The man beside you sloshes ale onto the table as he claps, his mug nearly flying free. You join in, palms stinging, heart thudding with the beat. There's something hypnotic in this chorus, as if the whole tavern has become a single organism, swaying and roaring together. The lute player shifts into a quicker rhythm, and the stomping intensifies. Tankards rattle against wood, dogs bark along as if keeping time, and even the serving girl belts a verse while sliding mugs into eager hands. You feel the vibration through the bench, up your spine, into your head, until you're half dizzy, half thrilled. Across the table, a man rises, wobbling, and attempts a solo verse. His voice cracks, the words tumble out in nonsense, and yet the tavern cheers louder than ever. It's not about talent, it's about courage, about daring to add your sound to the chaos. You wonder if karaoke night owes more to medieval drinking songs than anyone wants to admit. Historians still argue whether these songs were mostly silly distractions or carried hidden messages, political jokes, coded protests, or satire against lords and kings. Tonight, though, they feel like simple joy, like a spell cast to keep despair at bay. You take another sip, foam sticking to your lip, and realize your shoulders are looser, your chest lighter. The song rolls on, each verse spilling into the next. No one remembers where it started, and no one cares where it ends. It's about being carried, about belonging, about drowning the silence of life with sound. For a moment, you imagine bringing one of these songs into a modern pub. Picture 30 strangers belting a rhyme about sheep theft and alewives. The bar would either join in or call security. Here, though, the only authority is rhythm, and it rules absolutely. Your joke for the night. As the chorus swells again, you think, this is the medieval Spotify playlist. Track 1, ale. Track 2, more ale. Shuffle mode? That's just when the bard forgets the lyrics. The fire pops loudly in the hearth, sparks drifting upward, as if joining the rhythm themselves. You lean back, close your eyes for a second, and let the tide of song wash over you. When you open them again, the tavern is brighter, warmer, louder, as if the music itself has fed the flames. And somewhere in the middle of all this noise, you realize, tonight you don't just drink, you sing, you belong, you live inside a chorus bigger than yourself. Your ears still buzz from the roar of song when a clatter nearby catches your attention. A man raises his drink, not in a wooden mug this time, but in something far stranger. The vessel gleams in the firelight, heavy and polished, a drinking horn. Its curve catches the shadows like a serpent frozen mid-coil, the rim plated in brass. He tips it back with exaggerated flair, ale spilling down his beard, and the crowd cheers as though he's just performed a miracle. That's when you notice the variety all around. Some sip from squat pewter mugs, their dull grey metal dented from years of rowdy use. Others cradle ceramic jugs painted with crude designs. Spirals, flowers, sometimes just smudges that look more accidental than artistic. Then there are the gourds, hollowed and polished, a farmer's practical solution when you can't afford metal. Each vessel feels like a story, a badge of identity. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval Europe had no universal drinking glass. Vessels varied wildly by class, region, and wealth. Horns were common in the north, pewter among the middle classes, and fine glassware appeared only in the wealthiest courts by the late Middle Ages. Drinking wasn't just about what was inside, it was about what you held in your hand. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some folklore swears certain lords drank from hollowed human skulls, spoils of battle polished into macabre chalices. Whether myth or fact, the image alone is enough to make you grip your wooden mug a little tighter. Imagine raising a toast with that at Thanksgiving dinner. The man with the horn slams it onto the table, the echo ringing like a drum. Foam bubbles down its rim, and his friends scramble to refill it, arguing over whose turn it is next. You chuckle, wondering how many times horns rolled off tables and spilled half their precious contents across the floor. Practical? Hardly. Impressive? Absolutely. Across the room, a noble lifts a slender glass goblet, its surface so delicate it looks like it might shatter at the sound of laughter. Imported Venetian glass, maybe, worth more than an entire peasant family's home. He swirls his wine with studied grace, ignoring the farmer nearby who chugs from a chipped jug without pause. Two worlds again, drinking side by side but divided by material. Historians still argue whether ornate vessels were truly practical or mostly ceremonial. Did lords actually use those fragile, expensive goblets at every meal, or were they more like props, symbols of wealth dragged out for show? Watching the noble tonight, you suspect the latter. He doesn't even drink half of it before setting it down carefully, like a relic. Meanwhile, the farmer drains his jug and slams it proudly, demanding another. The tavern dog noses toward a discarded gourd cup on the floor, sniffing before lapping up the dregs. Even animals, it seems, aren't picky about vessels. A container is a container, so long as it holds the good stuff. You take a thoughtful sip from your own plain mug, wood rough beneath your fingers, and wonder how a modern crowd would react. Imagine pulling up to a bar, ordering a pint, and the bartender sliding a hollow cow horn across the counter. Would you grin and go for it, or ask sheepishly if they had a dishwasher-safe option? Your joke of the night? You picture medieval IKEA, drinking horn, model name Snurk, only 3 silver coins, does not fit in cup holders. The firelight flickers against every vessel, horns gleaming, mugs sweating, jugs dull and solid. And in that light you realize the container is part of the ritual. Every sip carries not just ale but identity. Rich, poor, soldier, monk, farmer, your drink tells the world who you are, even before you open your mouth. You set your mug down softly, feeling the weight of that truth as the tavern surges forward into another round of noise. The tavern hums on, mugs clinking, songs swelling, but your eyes drift toward the doorway where a woman strides in, apron tied tight, hair tucked beneath a kerchief. She carries herself not like a guest, but like an owner, her eyes sharp enough to slice through the smoke. Instantly, the room shifts. Men who moments before shouted drunkenly now shuffle slightly straighter, mugs drawn closer, as though aware she holds the power behind their happiness or their headaches. This is an alewife. You've already tasted her work without even knowing it. For centuries, women dominated the brewing trade, running small-scale operations out of their homes or selling their batches to the taverns. Brewing wasn't just craft, it was survival, often passed down from mother to daughter like a secret family inheritance. Here's your mainstream fact. In medieval towns, alewives often set up shop in their homes and mark the door with a broomstick above the entrance. That was the sign. You see a broom, you know ale is inside. Forget neon bar signs. This was medieval advertising at its simplest. Now the quirky tidbit. Sometimes these broomsticks were misread centuries later as witches' brooms, leading to legends about alewives dabbling in dark arts. In truth, the only magic they brewed was fermentation, but you can see how a strong woman with control over a community's beer might spook a few insecure men. The alewife in the tavern tonight scans the crowd with hawk-like precision. A man tries to sneak an unpaid sip. She's on him before he can blink, demanding coin. Another begs for credit until harvest. She considers, then nods once, her word final, her authority absolute. You realize she doesn't just sell ale. She controls the flow of camaraderie, gossip, and even trust. Historians still argue whether alewives were respected community pillars or ridiculed as greedy cheats. Some records int them as vital and independent, while others accuse them of watering down beer or overcharging customers. The truth is muddled, like the cloudy ale in your mug. But watching her move through the crowd, you sense she's feared more than mocked. I'll picture her home, large barrels lining the walls, steam rising from boiling pots, the air heavy with malt, children darting underfoot, stirring, straining, carrying. Brewing wasn't glamorous. It was hot, smoky, exhausting work. Yet for many women it gave independence in a world where most choices weren't theirs to make. She stops by your table, eyeing your mug. You fumble a coin across the wood. She weighs it with a glance, then fills your cup from a jug at her hip, amber liquid foaming to the brim. Without a word, she moves on, already scolding a man for spilling half his drink on the rush-strewn floor. Your joke for the night? You imagine Yelp reviews for alewives. 3 stars. Beer was fine, but broomstick above door fell on my head. You sip her brew, stronger than the last, and you can taste her precision, her experience. Each swallow feels like part of a legacy, generations of women holding the village together, one frothy mug at a time. Somewhere in the rafters, the broom above the tavern door creaks in the draught, its bristles swaying like a quiet reminder. Here, ale doesn't flow because men demanded it. It flows because women brewed it, guarded it, and kept it alive. And as you set your mug down, you realize the tavern itself beats to their rhythm. Your tongue is still coated with the earthy tang of ale when a sweeter scent drifts through the tavern, cutting across the haze of hops and smoke. Someone nearby raises a golden cup, and the liquid inside glows as though it caught the last rays of sunset. Honey mead. The word alone feels sticky, lush, almost decadent. You lean closer as the man tips it back, his lips shining with syrupy foam, and for a heartbeat you swear the whole tavern quiets just to watch. This isn't the everyday liquid bread of peasants. Mead is rarer, special, a drink that sings of feasts, festivals, and moments when life briefly pretends to be generous. It tastes of honey dissolved in water, fermented with yeast, sometimes kissed by herbs or spices. One sip and you're walking through summer fields alive with bees, even in the dead chill of winter. Here's your mainstream fact. Mead is considered one of humanity's oldest alcoholic beverages, predating beer and wine in many cultures. By the medieval period, it lingered in Northern Europe as a luxury or ceremonial drink, particularly in places where grape wine was scarce and honey was plentiful. And the quirky tidbit, some medieval beliefs linked mead with love and fertility. Newlyweds were encouraged to drink honey mead for a full moon cycle after marriage. Yes, that's where the term honeymoon comes from. You grin at the thought, romance by way of sticky lips and tipsy giggles. The man with the golden cup slams it down, smacking his lips like he's tasted paradise. His friends cheer, one boasting that mead fuels warriors braver than any knight. Another swears it makes poets weep out verses, their rhymes dripping with honey as much as their cups. Historians still argue whether these claims were exaggerations or if mead genuinely carried mystical status. Tonight, watching the crowd lean toward it, you feel the myth has more truth than ficties. Bont. The tavern dog noses the cup, licking at the dribbles on the table. A serving girl shoos it away, laughing, and then takes a quick sip herself before handing the cup back. No shame at all. You wonder if she'll be scribbling poems in the ashes later, or just snoring loudly against the hearth. You lift your own mug of ale, and suddenly it feels dull beside the mead's golden glow. Not jealous exactly, but like comparing tap water to champagne. You imagine offering a medieval villager a can of modern soda, sugar fizzing, bubbles biting, and watching their eyes widen. Sweet lightning, they'd call it, before probably mixing it with more mead. Here's your joke for the night. You picture a medieval dating app profile. Interests: falconry, lute playing, and sharing mead by the fire. Swipe left if you can't handle bees. Around you, voices rise again, this time softer, almost reverent. Mead isn't chugged the way ale is. It's sipped, savoured, rolled on the tongue. It carries a weight, a promise. You imagine Viking halls echoing with it, warriors clashing their horns, or poets whispering lines to lords in exchange for one more golden pour. You close your eyes as the scent of honey lingers in the air, sweeter than the sweat and smoke around you, and for a moment you feel lifted, as though the tavern has turned into a summer meadow. Bees hum in your ears, fire crackles beneath your feet, and you drift in the glow between myth and mug. A woman leans close to you, whispering with a grin that she's seen worse. Last winter, she says, a man forced into the drunkard's cloak, a barrel with holes cut for arms and legs, toppled over into the snow and had to be rolled home by his friends. The memory makes her cackle, and soon you're laughing too, even as the man in the stocks whimpers. You take another sip from your mug, strangely grateful you've managed to stay upright and unnoticed. It's a thin line between being part of the laughing crowd and being the one everyone laughs at. Your joke for the night? You imagine modern police adopting the donkey method. Sir, you're too drunk to drive. Here's your donkey. Good luck getting home. The crowd eventually disperses, the jeers fading as the man slumps against the wood, left to stew in his shame until morning. The tavern door creaks again, people slipping back inside to refill their mugs, as though justice were just another form of entertainment in their nightly program. You follow them in, the warmth rushing over you again, the laughter already replacing the echoes of punishment. Life, you realize, never pauses here. It simply sways, like a drunk stumbling but never falling completely. The tavern fills again, but now the mood has shifted. The nobles have retreated to their corner, the drunks in stocks are forgotten, and in the middle of it all, a group of men gathers around a massive oak table. Their clothes mark them as craftsmen, aprons still dusted with sawdust, fingers ink-stained, leather belts jangling with tools. This isn't just casual drinking. This is a guild hall meeting transplanted into a tavern. The men pound their mugs on the table in rhythm, not for song this time, but for order. One raises his hand, calling for silence, and to your surprise, the room actually settles for a moment. Then the talk begins, not of farming or noble hunts, but of trade. Prices for wool, disputes over apprenticeships, rumours of foreign merchants bringing new wares. Their words spill as quickly as their ale, politics and pints blending seamlessly. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval guilds weren't only professional organisations, they were also deeply social, and many meetings were held in taverns. Decisions about wages, apprenticeships and community projects were often made with mugs in hand, blurring business and beer. Now the quirky tidbit. Some guilds kept giant communal drinking vessels, massive bowls or oversized cups that members had to drink from during meetings. Fail to finish your share, and you risked fines, ridicule, or worse, another full pour. Imagine your office meetings today requiring a gallon-sized coffee cup drained before you can speak. The man leading the group raises a carved staff, his makeshift gavel, and bangs it against the wood. The vote begins. Each craftsman swears his position, ale foaming from his lips as he shouts. Cheers and boos erupt as decisions are made, but the rhythm always returns, mugs slamming like drums to seal each verdict. Historians still argue whether these guild debates in taverns represented genuine democracy, or just noisy rituals where the loudest voice won. Tonight, watching the flushed faces, the clashing opinions, you sense a bit of both. It's a strange half-democracy, messy, drunken, but alive. A younger apprentice, barely bearded, tries to argue against a senior craftsman. The room explodes in laughter, but the boy doesn't back down. He shouts louder, pounding his small fist, until even the older men hush to listen. You see something remarkable. Respect carved out not by age alone, but by guts, sharpened in the heat of ale and oak. Your joke for the night? You imagine today's corporate boardrooms running on this model. CEO at the head, CFO with a tankard, interns shouting from the back, and quarterly earnings decided by who can drain a communal beer bowl fastest. Honestly, productivity might actually go up. The serving girl weaves between benches, pouring endlessly, her tray almost as important as the guild staff. She knows the rhythm of their politics better than they do, slipping mugs down just before tempers flare too high, dampening the sparks with froth. You sip slowly, absorbing the scene, and realize that for these craftsmen the tavern is more than a drinking hall. It's their parliament, their courthouse, their networking event. Decisions made here will ripple into wages, apprenticeships, maybe even marriages. In the clink of mugs, the future is hammered out as surely as any horseshoe or bookbinding. The fire crackles, guild voices rise, and once again you feel the strange blend of order and chaos that defines medieval life. Ale, it seems, is never just ale. It's fuel for stories, songs, and even the politics that hold a community together. The Guildhall arguments still echo in your ears when a different kind of racket bursts through the tavern door. A group of young men stumbles in, robes half open, caps askew, their voices carrying the arrogance of people who believe they own the world, or at least the university down the road, students, and from the look of them, they're not here for knowledge tonight. One throws his arm around a peasant's shoulders, demanding he buy them a round, though it's clear the peasant has barely enough coin for himself. Another slaps the table, shouting in Latin as though drunken conjugations somehow make him sound wiser. The locals groan, some amused, others annoyed. University lads are notorious for this, books by day, brawls by night. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval universities were often hotbeds of disorder. Students lived in towns but felt protected by clerical privilege, which meant they were subject to church courts rather than local law. This fueled resentment with townsfolk, leading to frequent clashes and even riots. Now for the quirky tidbit, records tell of student drinking clubs with names like the Order of the Crown or the Galliards, where initiation rites involved wild toasts, absurd dares, and sometimes stealing pigs for feasts. Imagine explaining to your dean that the reason you're late for class is because you had to return a neighbour's pig. The students in the tavern tonight order wine, cheap stuff, watered down, but they treat it as though it were the nectar of the gods. One recites a bawdy poem, another leaps onto the bench to proclaim himself Rex Bibendi, king of drinking. The crowd boos and cheers in equal measure, and the serving girl mutters under her breath, already bracing for trouble. Historians still argue whether these students were genuinely unruly or whether towns exaggerated their behaviour to justify stricter controls. Watch. In this group, though, it's easy to see how reputation and reality fed each other. The swagger, the noise, the reckless dares. They thrive on the tension they cause.